When Brian Robbins became the new head of Nickelodeon last year, some Kids TV fans thought it would finally mean that things would change from the operationally rough, if creatively decent, Simon Zarghami age. How foolish and naive were we? Brian Robbins' first full year of tenure at the reins of the Big Orange Weirdo has probably been one of the worst years for Nickelodeon in recent memory. In 2019, Nickelodeon began to destroy itself from the inside, and Brian Robbins may be the one holding the flamethrower. Nickelodeon's woes did not begin in 2019 specifically. The channel also suffered from a lackluster 2018, as many of the network's new creations just didn't take off for one reason or another, with the network then switching to its other long-range strategy of milking the series that did. However, one can forgive a kids network for having an off year creatively, so long as they make up for it the next time around. Unfortunately, it seems that a dark age, or at least a dork age, could be creeping in for Nickelodeon. 2018 could have easily been seen as a fluke. 2019 was the beginning of a pattern. On the animated side of the network, first and second fill dominated in 2019 as they have for years. SpongeBob SquarePants and The Loud House are effectively the kings of the network, commanding the most airtime and the highest ratings. Though perhaps you can give SpongeBob a break this year. 2019 was the 20th anniversary of the series and was thus dubbed the best year ever. Celebrations began July 12th with the premiere of SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, and then continued by premiering episodes fairly consistently for the rest of the year, which is supposed to continue to the premiere of the third SpongeBob movie next May. Also, Nick announced a CGI summer camp spin-off of the show, Camp Coral, to much fan ire and criticism, and a, quote, music-based Squidward spin-off for Netflix. Back in February, Brian Robbins, then still newly installed at the network, vowed that they would keep SpongeBob in production for as long as the network exists. So, given it hasn't already died a hero, it seems it'll live long enough to see itself become the villain. Though, who will get there first? SpongeBob, or his partner in scheduling crimes? The Loud House launched in May 2016 and soon turned into a smash hit, ultimately taking up the second fill mantle previously held by the Fairly Odd Parents, a series which flamed out on Nicktoons in 2017. Its creator would follow, in spectacular fashion, the following year. The show has been confirmed through a season 5, and it still rates just fine in its 4th. If that's not evidence of its staying power, the Loud House recently launched a spin-off series, The Casa Grandes, back in October. I reviewed it here for this channel, and the rationale seems to be that if Nick can clone the Loud House, they can clone the rating success too. Unfortunately, it seems their theory has been proven right so far, which doesn't bode well for new original animation on the channel, which, outside of It's Pony, planned for this year but arriving in January, and the much-delayed and now Netflix-shaft Glitch Text, feels so very far away. Honestly, the best thing to come out of Nickelodeon in 2019 already happened on January 1st, the release of Pinky Malinky on Netflix. I'm still counting it as a Nick show because that's where its home should have been. The mockumentary-styled cartoon about an anthropomorphic hot dog and his human friends is pretty much everything we should be asking of episodic, comedy-driven cartoons these days. It's just a show where you can feel the fun coming off of it, with unique, distinctive characters and inventive, modern, but not patronizing humor to boot. My thoughts are probably better articulated in the videos I did around this time last year. As a time capsule from a few years ago, it's a relic of a better time at the network, when they were doing much better as a channel creatively. The show's second season has also been released, but I worry about whether the show has a future on Netflix beyond that. They're notoriously fickle for killing off shows, with a ruthlessness unmatched even by Nick's trigger finger for side channel burnoffs. A late-breaking development in Nickelodeon's 2019 is the all-but-confirmed moving of Glitch Text, also similarly delayed and both hoped for and worried about, from Nickelodeon to Netflix, set to arrive at some point next year. It's a bad move for the long-awaited new cartoon and for future Nick originals in general, if not only for the weight alone, then also for the precedent the move is setting with regards to content treatment, that I explained in greater detail in a recent video that'll be down in the description. On to the live-action side of the network, and when it comes to scripted stuff, things haven't been great. The channel's main new entry into the fray this year was Cousins for Life, about two cousins whose families move in together and hijinks ensue. Despite such high-quality guest stars as WWE star Roman Reigns, Nikki Ricky Dicky and Dawn's Lizzie Green, and a wandering older Nick star Daniela Monet, the concept just didn't work. I reviewed the show on its preview episode last fall, though the series didn't properly premiere until January 5th. Ratings weren't stellar early on, and while they got up to speed after a few episodes, they soon began to sink again, and the show couldn't even sustain 500,000 viewers for its season, and likely series, finale. I'm not sad to see it go, I'm just worried about the hole it leaves in Nick's content slate. The other sad story on the live-action side was the quiet demise of Night Squad, a series about a magical school for knights where two students entrust each other with their huge secrets. Their secrets got out to the rest of their squad at the end of season 1, which is sort of a perfect ending/non-ending, which sets things up well for a second season. Ratings were good enough, but weren't touching the magic million mark that Nick likes to see. The channel already showed they weren't interested in really continuing the show when it was renewed for only a 10-episode second season in July of 2018, half the length of the first season. The show returned in January to finish out its final episodes of Season 1, as well as all of Season 2. However, that was a 9 PM time slot, behind Cousins for Life, with the bare minimum of promotion. It felt like a subtle, dignified burn-off, given at least it wasn't being killed on Sundays or pushed off to TeenNick. Ratings for the show dipped accordingly, and despite the fact the show itself actually wrapped up nicely, the finale felt harsh given it was clear Nick didn't give the show's return a chance. 2019 is also, effectively, the end of the line for the works of Schneider's Bakery. The man and the company behind Nick's live-action hits for nearly a quarter-century parted ways last spring under rumored circumstances which I will not comment on. At the time, Schneider had 2 shows running on Nick, as he often did, Game Shakers, which wouldn't get a 4th season, and Henry Danger, which was Nick's biggest sitcom, to the point where they actually advertised it as TV's #1 kids comedy for much of the back half of 2018. That show would eventually make it 5 seasons, becoming Nick's longest-running sitcom in the process. After nearly a year's hiatus, Game Shakers ran its last 10 episodes in the spring of 2019, giving Henry Danger's command of the 8 PM Saturday time slot a break. Henry returned at the start of the summer for what was dubbed a special summer season of the show, even though it was just 4 episodes from season 5, already in progress, and then Henry Danger's musical to cap it off. Honestly, season 5 of Henry Danger is the best season of the show in a while. When the show comes to a close, likely sometime in the spring of next year, while I'll be a little sad with the finale, I'll also be content with it. The show's had a good run, likely coming up on 6 years by the time all the episodes air. It was an absolute juggernaut for the network, even spawning a short-lived spin-off that, despite critical scorn, I liked. I should do a video on it sometime. Throw me a comment if you'd like to see it. Probably the worst move I've seen from Nick this year is the apparent shafting of Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Nicktoons. The show was honestly one of the network's most promising series when it premiered last fall, yet here we are, just over a year later, and Nick seems to have given up on it. The show hadn't even made it through its first season before being sent off to die. The show had been struggling a little this year, with the show's ratings creeping further and further away from the magic million mark that seems to define a hit on Nick these days, but in the show's final episodes on Nick, the show still managed anywhere between 500 and 700,000 viewers. Those are really decent, respectable numbers. Those are numbers Cartoon Network would kill for. Unfortunately, while that's a success for CN, that's just mediocre for Nick, which has only gotten jumpier about maintaining its spot as the #1 kids network under Brian Robbins. On Nicktoons, at least the show still manages to take in just under 200,000 viewers on a good day. I guess Brian's taking the abbreviation of this show's title to heart. Rot, TMNT. The second most egregious move from Nick this year, besides their general desperation, was their attempts earlier in the year to pass off preschool shows as shows on main Nick, through either misleading advertising or sheer deception. Now let's be real. Anyone who knows their stuff around here could probably point out that Ryan's Mystery Playdate, starring venerable YouTube youngster Ryan Toys Review, is a preschool show. But Nickelodeon tried their darndest to hide that in pre-premiere promos for the show, using the Nickelodeon logo at the end of promos and plugging it outside preschool airtime. Those things put Ryan's Mystery Playdate onto the radar of the kids' TV community and proceeded to flat-out fail everyone's standards in its infantile inanity. Thus, it was widely panned. However, a mislabeled promo campaign doesn't explain Nick's acquisition of 44 cats from Rainbow of Winx Club fame. This is why branding is important. Brands come with expectations. Nick and Disney separate out their preschool stuff for a reason. So plugging what is clearly a Nick Jr. show as a Nick show is deeply problematic, to give them the greatest benefit of the doubt. And that's also why it's deceptive. Not on the level of any of the heinous crimes that Cartoon Network committed during their best summer ever stunt last year, but definitely somewhere on that scale. Deceptive and misleading moves like this sully Nickelodeon's reputation and damages viewer trust at a time when Nick needs it more than ever. Coming in at a very close third on the list of awful things Nick did this year was the network's downright disgusting handling of the third season of Hunter Street. The Dutch-flavored mystery adventure has been a solid performer for the network over the past 2 years, and despite the fact that episodes were strip premiered over the course of 4 weeks, the show got ratings that competed with the best of Nick's fare. So when the show announced it was getting an extended 30-episode third season, and that would be premiering July 22nd at 7:30 on Nick, it all seemed like amazing news for a very successful show. However, it was what happened after that was the awful part. On Thursday, July 18th, just days before the show was set to air, Nick pulled the planned premiere from its schedule. And this was while promos were running for it on Nick. Without prior warning, Season 3 was rescheduled to start on July 29th, and was sent off to TeenNick rather than premiering on the main channel, despite the show's previous stellar ratings. In a further shakeup to business as usual, the season was further split into 2 3-week chunks, one airing through mid-August and one airing in mid-September. Ratings plummeted accordingly, down to 1/10 the level they received on Nick in seasons 1 and 2. There seemed to be no premeditated reason to murder this show in this way. Ratings were high enough and they were already running promos on the main channel for it. But then suddenly they pulled the plug. With hopes for future seasons now in vain, it seems the motive behind the demise of Hunter Street is a mystery we'll never solve.
Make a wish, baby. Wow.
Possibly the best but most underrated move Nick pulled off this year, at least somewhere on their actual channel space, was the short-lived AwesomenessTV on TeenNick block. Featuring series actually oriented for teens from Viacom's distant online content subsidiary, and in its early weeks, MTV series from earlier this decade, it was a brief glimpse into what TeenNick could be if Nick actually cared enough for it as a channel. While not every show is a hit, and there was even one I actively reviled, it was perhaps the biggest thing that's been done with TeenNick since the 2009 rebrand of the N itself. Please take risks like this more often, Nick, and please make them last longer than a month or so in future. I made a video when the changes were first announced, but I never got the chance to follow up on it. I am planning on doing that though, so subscribe if you're interested in seeing it. Nick went in heavily on things that weren't cartoons or sitcoms this year. Too heavily, honestly. At first, you could pass it off as reasonable, but after the network's scripted content really started to grow thin, you could see it was just desperation kicking in after they let all those burnoffs happen previously. These kinds of things are usually where Nick shines, but they just can't hold up the network on their own. After being delayed for a year, Season 3 of Crashleets, the sports clip show answer to sibling network show Ridiculousness, finally aired on Nickelodeon. The reports of its send-off to burn on TeenNick last year were seemingly greatly exaggerated, though they were never explained. In contrast to the first 2 seasons, where NFL superstar Rob Gronkowski hosted the show alongside color clip commentators Stevie and Brandon, for Season 3, Stevie and Brandon held up the show themselves alongside a rotating sports guest, which luckily didn't dampen the show that much. However, even after a year's delay, there are still apparently episodes left to air, which isn't great to hear. The Substitute is a hidden camera prank show where celebrities are disguised as wacky undercover substitute teachers. The show fittingly launched on April Fool's Day, and perhaps even more fittingly, launched with Jace Norman, Henry Danger Star and Nick Celeb Extraordinaire, as its first celebrity. The show is actually pretty good, though Jace's episode was a bit iffy. The show started with 2 specials in the spring, then a 10-episode series pickup in October. They're still treating the premieres as specials for the time being, though honestly that might work out for them. One of the stranger creations to come out of Nick this year, stop that music, is America's Most Musical Family. The show is a reality competition where 30 families compete for a recording contract and a $250,000 cash prize, a ludicrous amount of money for Nick to give away, or even cable in general. The only prize higher than that is the $1 million of CNBC's Dear Nickelodeon reboot. I really have one question for Nick. Why did they make this? Before we even get to the awkward collection of washed-ups and who-are-theys they assembled to judge and host this thing, you have to wonder whose idea it was to put this on Nick. This could have been a show on any channel, really. Freeform, Paramount Network, ABC even. There's nothing that really makes this show inherently a Nick product. It could have been plopped onto almost any channel and probably have rated the same or even better. So I'm trying to figure out why Nick, in particular, decided on a show like this, beyond the fact that this would be quicker to make than a scripted series, and they've seriously been lacking in content this year. I would be more than fine to let this confusing concoction fade into an unremarkable blip in Nickelodeon's history, and the competition's crumbling ratings just might let me. Despite their previously Herculean resolve, Nickelodeon finally caved and could not help themselves in launching more reboots this year. One of the bigger ones was roping one of the network's more recent fixations, WWE superstar John Cena, for a reboot of Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader?, the show's third reboot since the original premiered on Fox in 2007. The show is pretty faithful to the format, despite a few gameplay tweaks and a change in the top prize to $100,000. As Cia will mention at times, the biggest game show prize Nick's ever had. It is an entertaining half hour, but arguably one of the more out of left field things the channel could reboot in 2019. And again, why did Nick make this specifically? Arguably, Fox's newly developing skew into a ploy for Flyover America would make this show a pretty fitting addition to that channel's lineup, assuming they got Jeff Foxworthy back to host it, that is. Despite the fact that the reboot launched in 2018, I'm gonna cover the all-new Double Dare as part of this year's review. The Liza Koshy-run revival of one of Nick's most beloved classic game show formats was actually a really good example on how to reboot a show without drowning in nostalgia, even though original host Mark Summers was right over there. Despite the stellar recreation of the show for a new generation, the show will be ending with its second season. The last 4 episodes are the holiday turn, which will run through December. The fact that it's on Fridays at 9 p.m. is kind of telling, isn't it?
Do you like scary stories?
In October, Nick aired a 3-episode miniseries reboot of the classic franchise Are You Afraid of the Dark? In one of the more unexpected reboot money pits of the year. In contrast to the original, where the focus was on the chilling tale the members of the Midnight Society delivered each week, the miniseries explored said story of the week coming to life, a pretty common trope, across the 3 episodes. It's a notable difference from the original show, and I wonder if that rankled any 30-somethings who were fans of the original that somehow cared enough to watch this. Admittedly, I skipped this whole thing, but I wonder about the execution and whether or not it was anything more than just another hopeless nostalgia grab. It sounds like it could have worked better as a movie, which was something originally planned by Paramount in 2017 before it was dropped. I guess they could have made it a 3-hour movie, but then we just have The Irishman. Brian Robbins said in an interview last year that if he had the power, he wouldn't have cancelled all that in September 2005 after its 10-season run. True to his word, in February 2019, Nick announced they were bringing back the kids' sketch show for an 11th season.
Tell me about this chair.
It's for when there's a second person here.
But it's just me, so...
So it's not being used right now.
Things we do not use, we thank and send on their way. Thank you, chair. Destroy!
My chair!
With a new cast, as obviously necessary, and plenty of callbacks to the original, the new show premiered July 15th, right after the return of Henry Danger, arguably the best lead-in you can get on Nick these days.
Do you need one of those doorbells that's also a camera? Ding dong. A pillow that remembers your face? Or a living legend?
The show itself is pretty good. It's not the most hilarious thing on TV, but it works, and it works very well. The concept of the kids' sketch comedy show is a good one, and one that hasn't been explored since Cartoon Network concluded the short-lived Incredible Crew after 13 episodes 5 years ago. Props to Nick for bringing this back and not making it feel like it was stuck reliving its glory days. Between the sad stories, bad stories, and maddening stories from Nick this year were a few shows not notorious enough to really mention. Middle School Moguls was a girl-skewing, animated miniseries, I guess? Nick aired for 4 weeks in September. The premiere was on Labor Day, then the rest ran on Sunday mornings. It was about 4 entrepreneurial girls and served as post-sitcom vehicles for 3 Nick stars: Haley Chu from Bella and the Bulldogs, Jade Payjon from School of Rock, and Daniela Perkins of the moribund and aforementioned Night Squad, which had been dead for about 5 months by this point. It's something where I don't even know why Nick decided to waste their money on it. Perhaps the fevers of desperation were still running high. Nick launched 2 LEGO franchises this year, LEGO City Adventures and LEGO Jurassic World Legend of Isla Nublar. LEGO feels like one of those brands that gets bounced around between networks but doesn't really fit in anywhere. Now it's Nick's turn for the short straw, possibly out of their ongoing dearth of content. Both shows have done alright for themselves, but I'll continue to pass on them. I'm really surprised that Alvin and the Chipmunks still exists as a show. It still rates highly, remarkably, and it came back in February after a 10-month hiatus. Ratings have sank a bit in what is now the show's 5th season, but they're still plenty strong. I can't believe it's still successful enough to avoid a burn-off on Nicktoons. Rumor has it that Brian Robbins is trying to burn the remains of the Zarghami era of Nick. Unfortunately, that means having to dispose of the likes of Rise the Turtles, Welcome to the Wayne, and even Pinky Malinky in particularly undignified ways. The thing is, he really didn't have to. What he should have done is use the remainder of the Zarghami era content as effectively filler until Brian's Nick can get stuff of its own done. Instead, Brian's made Nick look desperate and lacking for content by seemingly grasping at any straw they could grab. Making your content slate look weak and alienating, and in some cases infuriating, your audience and your fans is not the way to start your tenure as head of a new network. 2019, and to a lesser extent 2018 as well, has been marked, or marred, by a lack of new content from Nick compared to previous years, and seemingly just a tonal shift as Brian Robbins has taken power. The Nick of today is less creative, less experimental, even less willing to give new original content a chance, and increasingly more ruthless as it tries to hold on to 7-figure premiere numbers and its widening lead in kids' TV ratings, as if it's at any risk of losing that anytime soon. The surprise plummet of the ratings averages of its longtime rivals in Disney Channel and Cartoon Network has spooked Nick, and they probably would have been able to handle it better had they not sent off every new show they had to somewhere that wasn't the main Nick channel in a panic. Nick's newly reiterated content deal with Netflix will only worsen these problems, as limited resources that are badly needed to shore up the channel will be freed off on a platform that doesn't necessarily care about who it hurts, so long as its gaping pit of content gets fed. It's these problems, compounded onto the long-standing issues Nick had and hasn't ever resolved from the Zarghami days, that makes me worry for the future of Nickelodeon as we head into 2020 and beyond. While the Brian Robbins era is set to start bearing fruit next year, you have to wonder whether or not Nick's moves this year have dampened interest as to whether that fruit will taste any good. It'll take a lot of sweetness to start to get the bitter taste of Brian's Nick out of my mouth. Hit subscribe if you liked this recap of Nick's year that was, and stay tuned because my review of Kids TV in 2019 continues in my next video. Plus you'll get all the latest from the world of television every single week. While you're at it, check out some more of my videos right over here or down in the description. I'm Benzie Johnson Jr., I'm enthusiastic about television, and I'll see you next time.